What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burnett. In today's episode, I'm going to be bringing you guys my thoughts on what was a wild and exciting week 3 of college football, especially in a couple of huge games between top 20 or top 15 opponents. But before I get into all that, all the action and my takeaways from the week, if you go on to enjoy this video and want to see more content like this, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. But starting things out, let's go to South Bend, where the Texas A&M Aggies escaped with a win over the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. You've heard the meme, Bad Luck Brian, or you've seen that, if you're old enough to have seen that, or you know about Bill Buckner, the famous player, or infamous, I guess, for the Mets. In this case, it's Tyler Buckner, and I'm not going to feed into it too much more because I know the cameras were fixed on this poor guy for pretty much the remainder of the game after a huge dropped snap on an extra point that would have put the Irish up 7. But there's a lot more that went into this game beyond that. So there's also a missed holding call on a key 4th down play. Actually, I think it was the game-winning play from Marcel Reed to Nate Borkacher, former Nebraska Cornhusker, who scored that game-winning touchdown. And talking about Marcel Reed, oh my goodness, this guy has put himself, I think, with a game like this on the road against a top 10 opponent, he's put himself into the Heisman conversation. He accounted for almost 400 total yards, 397 to be exact, 360 passing, 37 rushing, threw for 2 touchdowns. He did have an interception, but played a really good game. Le'Veon Moss, the Aggies running back, also had a big game. Reed's receivers, Casey Concepcion and Mario Craver both had huge games. Craver especially, I think, went off for over 200 receiving yards, so huge game for those guys. And it wasn't a bad game by the Irish. I mean, this game was an instant classic. It was a battle. It was kind of a back-and-forth game. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price combined for 162 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. And then again, against a very quality opponent, the freshman quarterback C.J. Carr looked pretty good. 20 for 32, 293 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But what is the outlook? Because you guys already kind of know what happened in those games. I don't need to sit here and break it down. But to me, for Texas A&M, this does mean a lot. It is a really good road win against a ranked opponent, but it'll mean nothing if they have another one of those late season collapses. They had one last year. They were sitting at 6-1, 7-1, pretty much the top dog in the SEC for a little bit of time. And then they kind of fell apart down the stretch last year and finished the regular season 8-4. So they still have to avoid that. And it won't be easy because they're at number 3 LSU, at number 23 Missouri, and home against South Carolina. And then obviously that rivalry game at number 8 Texas. Those are rankings based on the most recent AP poll. South Carolina dropped out to Vanderbilt. Real quickly, shout out to Vanderbilt. That's a really good road win for the Commodores. And I think they've kind of pushed themselves, I think, for sure, out of that bottom group of teams in the SEC that are fighting for bowl games, and they're now in that dark horse category. I might talk about the Commodores a little bit more, maybe previewing next week or whenever they have kind of another big game on their schedule, but Commodores are looking pretty good. But anyways, continuing to talk about Texas A&M, they're still going to have to avoid that. I think the health of Le'Veon Moss is going to be key to that. Texas A&M, they lost, like 4 of their last 5 games or whatever it was. Moss missed all of those games. So if he stays healthy, I think that adds a dynamic to the offense. I think Marcel Reed is also a year older and even better this time around. So that will be key as well. For Notre Dame, the question here is, are their college football playoff hopes dashed? I don't think so quite yet. For one, their 2 losses are really quality losses. I mean, it's going to be a top 10 potentially. Texas lost to Texas A&M. You've got a loss to number 4 Miami right now, who continues to look really good. More on the Hurricanes in a bit. So I think it's not quite, but they are going to need to win out. They've only got one potentially ranked opponent on their schedule. That's USC, and they're coming in right at the tail end of the rankings this week. So other than that, maybe Boise State gets up there, but that loss to USF is certainly going to kind of sour their resume. So that's kind of what I think coming away from that one. Texas A&M, they prove they can win a big game on the road, but will they be able to avoid that late season collapse? And for Notre Dame, they're probably even going to maybe need some help with teams in front of them losing as well. But if they win out, finish with a 10-game winning streak, it will be pretty hard to keep the Irish out of the college football playoff. And especially if those teams they lost to continue to play very well. Then an instant classic at Neyland Stadium. Another season, though, of heartbreak for Tennessee to the Georgia Bulldogs. The Bulldogs beat the Vols again with late heroics in an overtime win. Tennessee led by 14 early, then they led by 8 late. Georgia went down and scored a touchdown, 2-point conversion to tie it. Really even, balanced game. Georgia had 502 yards of total offense. Tennessee had 496. So I guess if you look at it that way, those extra 6 yards made all the difference, really. I will say, to me, a positive takeaway for Tennessee, first of all, it's the offense. Joey Aguilar had a really good game. They were able to run the ball pretty well also with Star Thomas. But also, their defensive line showed a little bit of promise and maybe a bit more than I expected from them this year. You know, they had some big losses to the NFL, but they had 4 sacks against Georgia in this game. So I think, you know, this is certainly not the end of the road for the Volunteers. I thought going into the season that, yes, they would lose this game, but I didn't think they would look quite as good as they have so far. I thought the loss of Nico Iamaleava would be a little bit bigger than it's proven to be, and some of those other guys to the NFL. But so far, Tennessee certainly looks like a contender. And honestly, the rest of the way, they have a fairly manageable schedule. They're at Alabama, home against Oklahoma, at Florida, which is questionable how tough that game's going to be the way the Gators have looked so far, and then home against Vanderbilt. So, you know, you get 2 of those games at home. You've got a Florida team that it has the toughest schedule in college football, and who knows where they're going to be at by the time that game rolls around. And then a road game at Alabama that has looked good, but they had a lot of questions in that loss to Florida State to open the season. So I think Tennessee, there's a strong possibility this team could finish kind of around that 10-2 mark again. And if that's the case, they get into the playoff again, especially if their losses to Georgia, and maybe let's just say it's on the road to Alabama or maybe at home against a really good Oklahoma team. If it's either of those, I think Tennessee is back in the playoff. Georgia, meanwhile, I think they're a top 5 team. I'll go through kind of just off the top of my head, probably my top 5, maybe my top 10 at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Also, though, Gunnar Stockton proved that he can throw the ball. I think a lot of people, myself included, looked at him as a little bit more of a runner. Weren't sure about exactly how well he'd be able to throw the ball down the field, but he was 23 for 31 for 304 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a couple of really good throws down the field in this win. So I think Georgia is back to looking, you know, like that team that can win the SEC and make some noise, maybe even win the college football playoff. It's a big road win for Georgia here. Miami, meanwhile, I think they've kind of already proved it, but further proved it with a dominant win over USF that they are for real. Carson Beck, 340 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. He did throw 2 interceptions, but I think that's a really a credit to the Bulls defense. They have a really good secondary. James Schultz was one of the guys who got one of those interceptions. He's a really good DB. And then Mark Flesher rushed for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. So the offense looks good. And then the defense kind of buckled down, especially in 3rd down and 4th down situations. The USF was 7 for 19 on 3rd down and then 0 for 2 on 4th down. This is also a case they kind of put this game away by halftime. Obviously, halftime came a lot later than expected with the weather delay that was going on in Miami, but it was 28-6 at halftime, and really it was kind of wrapped up after that. But the Bulls do have 2 quality wins still. Although each week that Florida struggles, and I'll talk about them next, that does look a little less shiny, I guess. I think Boise State, that win will look good because I think this is a Boise State team that is kind of trying to figure out their identity, what they're going to do without Ashton Genty, and I think they could look really good as the season goes along. I think it's kind of similar to what's going on at Michigan as well, and maybe even could happen at Iowa. I think as both of those teams kind of find their identity. I mean, Bryce Underwood looked really good throwing the ball this week. I think put up 60-plus points against Central Michigan, so that's kind of an aside right there. But I think USF, you know, those are going to be 2 wins. Even if Florida does struggle, it's always a hard place unless Florida winds up going 3-9, which the way they're playing is a real possibility. They're on the way to finishing like that, especially with their schedule. But if Florida finishes even with like 6 wins or something like that, that's still a good win over an SEC team that I think the committee will value when we're looking at these group of 5 resumes come the stretch run. Talking about those Gators, though, for DJ Lagway, which one are we going to get? Are we going to get the guy who led the Gators to those ranked wins down the stretch last year, finished the season 4-0, beat some good SEC teams, LSU, and then beat Tulane in the bowl game? or are we going to get a guy who threw 5 interceptions this past week against LSU? Now, I do want to credit the LSU defense because they didn't just get interceptions. It's not like they were, just fortunate with a quarterback who was struggling to throw the ball. No, they were creating a lot of havoc and pressure against DJ Lagway. They got home for 3 sacks in the game. Shout out Deshaun Spears. He had 2 of those interceptions. One of those he returned for a pick 6 as well. And that LSU defense looks really good. I mean, you look at the linebackers in Whit Weeks, especially, and Harold Perkins. And also, how cool is it for Whit Weeks to be playing with 2 of his brothers this year? This defense as well has only allowed 27 points through 3 games, and that includes against a Clemson team that we had a lot of high expectations for going into the season. They haven't looked the part so far, but we knew that they had some decent pieces on offense. Maybe not as good as we thought. Maybe it's the same story with Florida, or maybe for both of those teams, it's the case that they've ran into a really good LSU defense, and I think that's definitely at least part of it. As the seasons develop and go along, we'll have to see. I mean, because Clemson still struggled against Georgia Tech. I'll talk about that game next. And then Florida obviously struggled and lost to USF. So it's yet to be seen if that's all LSU or if both of those teams are going through their own offensive issues. It's cop out, but it's probably a little bit of both. So that's kind of my thoughts from that game. And then for Florida, no rest for the weary. They're up at number 4 Miami this coming week. Then they'll finally get a much-needed bye week, and that'll be pivotal. If they can somehow go into Miami against a really good Hurricanes team and get a win, they're sitting at 2-2 through a tough portion of their schedule, but it's probably a case of you expected them to beat USF and maybe expected them to lose to Miami, and those games just went opposite. So they're still sitting at 2-2, but against the rest of that schedule, I don't see them losing fewer than 2 games. So I think they're probably out of the playoff hunt. A win at Miami would kind of give them a little bit of hope, but otherwise, I think it's going to be another long season in Gainesville. Then finally, I talked about it here. Clemson, Georgia Tech gets the upset win, I guess you could call it. I know Clemson was favored. I think this was a very popular upset pick. I kind of convinced myself that I thought, Clemson would be able to get the job done. They did not. Aaron Burr with a 55-yard game-winning field goal. They also had a really good kind of it wasn't a 2-minute drive. It was a little over 3 minutes, but kind of a good 2-minute drive type of drive to set them up for that field goal. However, I do think Clemson is a little bit like Notre Dame. Their 2 losses this season are to 2 teams who look really good so far. Both pretty close losses, very close losses as well. But I do think they're also in a scenario where they do have to win out. And if they do, unless it comes down to a tiebreaker of them with Georgia Tech, they'd probably be in the ACC championship game. Their only real test to me remaining is home against number 7 Florida. They've still got North Carolina. We'll see how that shakes out if they improve after that loss to TCU in week 1. They've won their last 2 since. SMU, although Mustangs haven't looked phenomenal to me so far, they haven't quite looked like that playoff team from a year ago. So Clemson, I think they certainly have the right road to finish the regular season at 10-2, 9-3 at worst. 9-3, they're out of the playoff conversation. 10-2, they're probably going to the ACC championship game again. And Dabo, whatever your thoughts are on him, he does know how to get the Tigers to the ACC championship game. He's done it 9 straight years or something like that. So this is certainly not the end of the line for Clemson, nor is it for Notre Dame. I think Florida, if you're kind of gauging where these teams are at, they're a lot more kind of at the end of their rope, but Notre Dame and Clemson, I think, are still in the conversation. Now, going over that top 10 that I mentioned earlier, just kind of quickly going through it. Ohio State at number 1. I've got LSU at number 2, Miami at number 3. I think those teams are kind of interchangeable, but they've both looked good. They both have a couple of ranked wins. Number 4, I'm going to go with Georgia. They have a really good road win in the SEC. I'll go with Texas A&M then at number 5 because they have a really good win on the road against a team that made the national championship game last year. Then I've got Penn State and Oregon. Those are kind of 2 teams that I think need to prove it a little bit more. Then I've got Florida State. I think they have that really good win, obviously. Then I'll go with Texas down at number 9. And rounding it out, I have Oklahoma at number 10. But that is my top 10. I'll have it popped up here on screen. Let me know your guys' thoughts on the Week 3 action, what you're kind of taking away from it, and what you're looking forward to in Week 4. I'll have that preview video up next. But that is all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burnett, signing out. Peace.